I set up my camera in an empty banquet room, and 40 minutes later, the only person who walked through that door was the birthday girl herself. No friends behind her. No sister. No boyfriend. Just her, in a green dress she'd clearly picked out for an audience that never came. My name is Ryan Cole. I'm 32, and I make my living photographing other people's happiness. Weddings, graduations, birthday parties, the kind of events where everybody smiles a little too hard for the camera and calls it a memory. I got into the job after a few years of shooting freelance for local magazines, tired of chasing stories nobody wanted to read. Photographing people on the best day of their year felt simpler. Cleaner. I showed up. I made them look good. I left before the emotional wreckage of real life ever had a chance to reach me. That was the plan anyway. Plans have a way of embarrassing you the second you get comfortable in them. I'd been booked for this particular job 3 weeks earlier by a woman named Priya, who introduced herself as the best friend and self-appointed party planner for someone named Sophie Bennett, who was turning 30 that Saturday. Priya had sent me a mood board, a guest list of nearly 40 people, and instructions detailed enough to make a wedding planner blush. Fairy lights. A dessert table themed around Sophie's favorite color, which was apparently a very specific shade of sage green. A photo booth corner with props nobody over the age of 12 should legally use, and a banner that read 30 and thriving in gold cursive letters. Priya paid half up front and told me twice, unprompted, that Sophie deserved this more than anyone she knew. I remember thinking that was a strange thing to insist on twice. I didn't think much more of it. People say strange things when they're organizing parties. Stress does that. The venue was a rented private room above a restaurant downtown, the kind of space with exposed brick, string lights already built into the ceiling, and a small stage area that probably hosted open mic nights on slower evenings. I arrived an hour early, per usual, because photographers who show up late don't get rehired, and I liked eating regularly. The staff had already set up half the decorations Priya had ordered. Balloons in 3 shades of green. A banner, slightly crooked, that somebody would need to fix before guests arrived. A dessert table with a 2-tier cake that read Happy 30th Sophie in the same gold cursive as the banner. I did my usual walkthrough. Checked the lighting. Adjusted 2 lamps that were casting shadows exactly where I didn't want them. Tested my flash against the brick wall to make sure it wouldn't blow out every photo into a washed-out mess. Normal setup. Nothing about that room told me anything was wrong yet. Rooms don't warn you. People do, eventually, but rooms just sit there holding whatever's about to happen. At 6:30, half an hour before the party was supposed to start, I texted Priya to confirm timing. She responded fast. Running a little behind, so sorry, be there by 7. I didn't think anything of it. Party planners run behind. That's basically the job description. By 7, nobody had arrived. Not Priya. Not a single one of the 40 names on that guest list. Not even venue staff checking in beyond the one waiter who kept refilling a water pitcher nobody was drinking from. I told myself these things run on a delay. Nobody arrives exactly on time to a party, especially not one with an open bar tab, which Priya had mentioned twice in her instructions like it was a competitive advantage. I sat near my equipment, scrolled through my phone, reviewed the shot list one more time, and tried not to notice the particular kind of quiet that settles into a room built for 40 people and currently holding one photographer in a slowly melting ice sculpture shaped, for reasons I never learned, like a swan. At 7:15, I texted Priya again. Still coming? She left me on read. That was the first genuine flicker of unease I felt. Small, easy to dismiss, but real. I've photographed enough events to know the difference between normal delay and something quietly going wrong. This felt like the second one, even though I couldn't have told you why yet. At 7:30, the door opened, and I looked up expecting the flood of guests I'd been braced for. Instead, one woman walked in alone. She was maybe 5'6", dark hair pinned up in a style that had clearly taken effort, wearing a green dress that matched the balloons a little too perfectly for coincidence, which told me immediately this was Sophie, dressed exactly for the party she believed was waiting for her. She had a small clutch purse, gold earrings, the kind of makeup that says I wanted tonight to matter. She stepped into the room, scanning it once, twice, the way you scan a parking lot when you've forgotten where you left your car and are still hoping you're wrong about that. Then she stopped scanning because there was nothing left to find. Her mouth opened slightly, not in surprise exactly, in recognition, like some part of her had expected this and hated being right. "Hi," I said, because somebody needed to say something, and apparently that job fell to the photographer. "I'm Ryan. I'm shooting tonight." She looked at me, then at the empty tables, then back at me. "Shooting what exactly?" Her voice was light, trying for a joke, but it cracked slightly in the middle, the kind of crack you only hear if you're already listening for it. I didn't have a good answer for that. The room, apparently. Very artistic use of negative space. She let out a small laugh that had almost nothing to do with humor. Then she walked further in, set her purse down on the nearest table like her hands needed somewhere to put the weight, and looked at the banner. "Happy 30th Sophie," crooked, gold, cheerful in a way that suddenly felt cruel. "Where's everyone?" she asked, mostly to herself. I checked my phone. Priya said 7. It's 7:30 now. Sophie's expression did something complicated then, something I'd later understand much better. Hope trying to survive contact with evidence. She pulled out her own phone, and I watched her scroll, watched her thumb pause over something, watched her face change the way faces change when a private humiliation becomes suddenly, undeniably public, even if the only witness is a photographer she'd met 90 seconds earlier. She turned the phone toward me without being asked, which told me how badly she needed someone else to see it too. Needed it to be real and not some misunderstanding she was inventing out of anxiety. It was a group chat. Sophie's birthday, with 2 exclamation points and a party emoji. 40-some names, or close to it. And scrolling through the last hour of messages, a slow, casual unraveling. Priya first. "Guys, so sorry, something came up with my mom. Can someone else handle setup?" Then someone named Jess. "OMG, I totally forgot this was tonight. I already made plans. Next time though." Then a cascade of others, quieter, sneakier, the kind of messages people send when they've decided collectively that something isn't worth their evening, and they're each hoping to not be the one who says it out loud. "Can't make it. So sorry. Miss you. Let's do coffee soon." Then, worst of all, from someone named Marcus, no message at all, just 3 dots that appeared and disappeared twice, and then nothing. Just silence, which somehow said more than any excuse could have. Sophie stood there holding the phone, staring at 40 broken promises dressed up as scheduling conflicts, and I watched the exact moment she stopped hoping any more names would show up. "I should go," she said quietly, more to the banner than to me. "Go where?" I asked. "Home, I guess." She laughed again, that same hollow sound. "Where else would I go? I don't exactly have a backup party." I don't know what made me say what I said next. Maybe it was the swan eye sculpture slowly losing its shape in the corner like a metaphor nobody asked for. Maybe it was the crooked banner nobody would ever fix now. Maybe it was just that I'd spent 6 years photographing other people's celebrations and had never once seen someone stand this alone inside one. "You paid for this cake, right?" I asked. She blinked at me. "Priya organized everything. But yeah, I think so." "Why?" "Because it would be a real shame to let a 2-tier cake go to waste on account of 40 people having questionable priorities," I said. "I'm not doing anything else tonight. I already got paid for 4 hours of shooting a party. Might as well shoot something." Sophie looked at me like I'd said something in a foreign language. "You want to stay? For my sad, empty birthday party?" "I want to stay for cake," I said. "The party part is optional. The cake part feels non-negotiable at this stage." That got an actual laugh out of her this time. Small but real, the kind that surprises the person laughing more than anyone else in the room. She wiped under one eye quickly, like she was trying to catch a tear before it counted as one. "This is humiliating," she said. "It's really not," I said. "You showed up. That's more than 40 other people managed tonight." She looked at me for a long moment. like she was deciding whether to trust that sentence or file it away as something a stranger says to be kind. Then she pulled out a chair at the nearest table, the one closest to the cake, and sat down like her legs had finally admitted how tired they were. "Fine," she said, "but if you're staying, you're getting a plate. I'm not eating a two-tier cake alone in front of a photographer. That's a different kind of sad than the one I'm currently living." I sat down across from her, unhooked my camera from around my neck, and set it on the table between us like a small, unspoken agreement. "Deal," I said. We started with cake, because apparently that's how the whole evening had decided to reorganize itself. I cut 2 slices with the ceremonial knife some venue employee had left tucked into a napkin, clearly under the assumption that 40 people would be standing around cheering when it happened. Instead, it was just me and Sophie, at a table meant for 6, the string lights above us doing their best to look festive despite the circumstances. "So," I said, "since we're apparently doing this, 30, how's it feel?" Sophie considered the question with more seriousness than it probably deserved. "Honestly, exactly like 29, except now people expect you to have a 5-year plan and a retirement account that isn't a joke." "Do you have those things?" "I have a retirement account," she said. "It has $41 in it. I consider that aspirational." I laughed, and something in her expression eased slightly at the sound, like she needed proof the evening could still produce something other than silence and empty chairs. "What do you do," she asked, "when you're not photographing other people's disasters?" "This is actually my first documented disaster," I said. "Usually it's just weddings, birthdays, the occasional very awkward family reunion where somebody's uncle gets too honest after 2 drinks. Sounds glamorous. It's mostly making strangers pretend to laugh at things that aren't funny so I can catch the moment right after, when the laugh becomes real. That's the job. Catching the real thing hiding behind the performed thing." She looked at me a little differently after that, like I'd accidentally said something true about more than photography. "And what's the real thing hiding behind tonight's performed thing?" she asked quietly. I didn't have an answer fast enough, so she filled the silence herself. "That I organize things obsessively so people will show up," she said, "and then they still don't, and I still don't know how to stop being surprised by that." I set my fork down. "That's not on you," I said. "That's on 40 people who apparently forgot how basic loyalty works." She shook her head slowly. "It's not that simple. I've known some of these people since college. Pri has been my best friend for 8 years. I helped her move apartments 4 times. I drove 6 hours to her sister's wedding in a snowstorm. I don't think this is one bad night. I think this has been building for a while, and I just kept telling myself it wasn't." That was the first real thing she'd said all night, the kind of sentence that costs something to say out loud. I didn't rush to fill the space after it. I'd learned that much from years of watching people's faces in the seconds after a real confession, waiting to see if they'd take it back. She didn't take it back. Instead, she reached for her phone, hesitated, then set it face down on the table like she was trying to physically remove the temptation to check it again. "Can I tell you something strange?" she said. "Strange is kind of the theme of the night," I said. "Go ahead." "Part of me isn't even surprised," she said. "I think somewhere in the last year, I've been the one calling, the one organizing, the one remembering birthdays and showing up to things. And somewhere along the way, I stopped noticing that it had become a one-way street. Tonight's just the first time the math got impossible to ignore." I nodded slowly, turning that over. "Sounds exhausting," I said. "Being the only one keeping score of an even trade that stopped being even a long time ago." Her eyes came up to mine, surprised, like she hadn't expected a stranger with a camera to land that close to the actual truth on the first try. "Yeah," she said quietly. "That's exactly it." We sat there for a while after that, working through the cake slower than either of us probably wanted to admit, the string lights humming faintly overhead, the swan sculpture continuing its slow collapse in the corner like it had given up on being decorative and settled for being honest instead. Somewhere around the second slice, Sophie started talking more, the way people do once the first real sentence breaks the dam, holding back the rest. She told me she worked as a pediatric nurse, for years in the same children's hospital wing, the kind of job that ate holidays and weekends and left her too tired most nights to notice how few people were checking in on her the way she checked in on everyone else. She told me about a kid named Dylan who'd been in and out of the oncology ward for 8 months and always asked her to draw a small cartoon frog on his hospital wristband before chemo, because frogs, according to Dylan, were funny enough to distract from needles. She told me about the time she cried in a supply closet after a bad shift and Priya had texted her a meme instead of calling, and how she'd laughed it off at the time and only now understood what that had actually meant. I found myself listening more than I usually did on jobs like this, which normally involved smiling politely at strangers while mentally reviewing my shot list. Something about Sophie made the room quieter in a way that had nothing to do with the missing guests. "What about you?" she asked eventually. "Any tragic backstory explaining why you're spending a Saturday night eating cake with a stranger instead of your own plans?" "No tragic backstory," I said. "Just an empty calendar and a professional obligation to witness cake being cut, apparently. No wife, girlfriend, some very understanding partner wondering where you are?" "Divorced 2 years ago," I said, which surprised me even as I said it, because I didn't usually volunteer that information to clients, let alone clients I'd known for 90 minutes. Nothing dramatic. We wanted different things. She wanted stability. I wanted to keep chasing freelance work that barely paid rent. Turns out you can love someone and still be moving in opposite directions. Sophie's expression softened. "That's its own kind of grief," she said. "The kind where nobody did anything wrong, and it still hurts just as much." "Yeah," I said. "Nobody warns you about that version." We kept talking after that, past the cake, past the point where the venue staff started quietly checking whether we needed anything else, past the point where Sophie's phone buzzed twice on the table and she didn't turn it over to check. At some point she asked if I wanted to see the photo booth corner Priya had set up, the one with props nobody over 12 should legally use, and I said obviously, professionally speaking, that was the entire reason I'd been hired. We took photos. Ridiculous ones. Sophie in a plastic tiara that had clearly been ordered in bulk from somewhere with questionable quality control, me in oversized sunglasses that made me look like a disgraced game show host. She laughed for real this time, loud enough that the sound bounced off the exposed brick, loud enough that for a few minutes the empty chairs around us stopped mattering quite as much. I caught the exact moment on camera when her laugh went from performed to real, the same moment I always try to catch at every event I shoot. Except this time I wasn't documenting somebody else's happiness from a professional distance. I was standing inside it. By 9 o'clock, the venue staff had started quietly packing up untouched trays of food nobody had come to eat, and Sophie sat back down at our table, tiara slightly crooked, looking lighter than she had 2 hours earlier, even though nothing about her actual situation had changed. 40 people had still failed to show up. She still had a phone full of unanswered questions she hadn't asked yet. But something in her had loosened slightly, the way a held breath finally releases. "Thank you for staying," she said. "I know this wasn't remotely what you signed up for." "Honestly," I said, "this might be the best party I've ever shot. Low attendance, but excellent conversation." She smiled at that, really smiled, and then her phone buzzed again, and this time she turned it over. I watched her face change as she read whatever was on the screen, watched the warmth from the last 2 hours get shadowed by something colder. "What is it?" I asked. She turned the phone toward me. It was a message from Priya, sent to the same group chat as before, but this time addressed just to Sophie. "Hey, so sorry again about tonight. Hope it wasn't too weird being there alone, lol. We're all still doing something for your birthday, just smaller, more low-key. You know how everyone's schedules get. Zoxo." Sophie stared at the message like it was written in a language that used to make sense to her and suddenly didn't. "Smaller," she repeated quietly. "More low-key." She looked up at me. "There is no smaller version, Ryan. This is the version. I'm sitting in it right now." I didn't say anything right away because I could tell she wasn't finished. "You know what the worst part is?" she said. "It's not even that they didn't come. People get busy. Things happen. The worst part is the message afterward, The one that pretends there's a smaller, better version happening somewhere else that I just wasn't important enough to be told about in advance. That's not busy. That's a decision. I nodded slowly. Yeah, I said. That's not disorganization. That's a choice, dressed up as one. She let out a breath, long and shaky, the first sign all night that the composure she'd been holding onto might actually crack. I don't want to cry in a room with a swan made of ice, she said. It feels beneath the moment somehow. Cry anyway, I said. The swan won't judge you. It's melting too fast to form opinions. That got a wet, surprised laugh out of her. And then, finally, the tears she'd been holding back all night. I didn't reach for her right away. I'd learned, somewhere in 6 years of photographing other people's most vulnerable moments, that comfort offered too fast can feel like a performance too. I waited until she looked up at me, until her eyes asked the question her mouth wasn't ready to ask yet, and only then did I reach across the table and take her hand. You don't have to pretend tonight was fine, I said quietly. It wasn't fine. But you're allowed to be angry about that without it meaning you're being dramatic. 40 people missed something they should have shown up for. That's on them, not you. Sophie held onto my hand like it was the only steady thing left in the room. For a long moment, neither of us said anything else. The string lights kept humming overhead. The swan kept dissolving into something unrecognizable in the corner. And somewhere in that quiet, something between us had already started, even though neither of us had the language for it yet. 2 days later, Sophie called me. Not texted, called, which felt like its own small statement of intent. I have a confession, she said when I picked up. I've been staring at the photos you sent over, and I think you're a better photographer than half the people I've hired for actual weddings. That's generous, I said. Most of them were taken while wearing a tiara clearly designed for someone with a much smaller head. The tiara added character, she said. Anyway, I wanted to say thank you again. Properly. Not over cake at a party nobody attended. Are you asking me to dinner, Sophie Bennett? I'm asking you to dinner, Ryan Cole. Somewhere with more than one guest, and significantly less melting ice sculpture. I can work with those conditions, I said. We met that Thursday at a small Italian place near her hospital, the kind with red checkered tablecloths, and a waiter who brought bread nobody asked for, and everybody was grateful for anyway. Sophie showed up in jeans and a soft gray sweater, hair down this time. No performance in the way she carried herself, just herself, comfortable in a way the birthday dress hadn't quite allowed for. Before we even ordered, she set her phone on the table, screen down, same as she had at the party. I've been thinking about something, she said. Priya texted me again yesterday. Apparently the smaller, low-key thing happened. Dinner, 6 people, know me. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it. I'm not, she said, surprising me. I think I finally understand something I didn't want to understand before. I spent 8 years being the friend who remembered things, who showed up, who organized the birthdays and drove through snowstorms. And somewhere in there I mistook being useful for being valued. Those aren't the same thing. No, I said slowly. They're really not. She looked at me directly then. You said something at the party. About catching the real thing hiding behind the performed thing. I've been thinking about that a lot. I think for years I've been performing gratitude for scraps, because the alternative was admitting how lonely the real math actually was. That's a heavy realization for a Thursday dinner, I said. She smiled faintly. You started it. You're the one who showed up to an empty party and somehow made it the best birthday I've had in years. I didn't have grand plans that night either, I reminded her. Cake was involved. Cake solves a lot of problems. Cake didn't make me laugh that hard in a plastic tiara, she said. You did. The conversation slipped easily after that, past the topic of Priya and the group chat and the smaller, low-key dinner that hadn't included her, into easier territory. She asked about my divorce, gently this time, not fishing for tragedy, just curious the way people get curious about someone they're starting to actually care about. I told her the honest version, not the polished one I usually gave clients who asked out of small talk. That my ex-wife, Kelly, had wanted a life with more certainty in it than freelance photography could offer, and that I hadn't been willing at the time to trade the unpredictable parts of the job for a steadier paycheck somewhere else. And that 2 years later, I still wasn't entirely sure which of us had been right. Do you regret it? Sophie asked. Choosing the unpredictable thing? Some days, I said. Then I meet someone who makes an empty banquet hall feel like the most interesting room I've been in all year, and I remember why unpredictable felt worth it. She went quiet at that, the good kind of quiet, the kind that means a sentence landed somewhere it was meant to. Then she reached across the table, same as I had reached for her hand 2 nights earlier, and this time it was her fingers finding mine. That's dangerously charming for someone who met me during my most humiliating moment, she said. I don't think it was humiliating, I said. I think it was honest. Most people don't find out who actually shows up for them until something forces the truth into the open. You found out early. That's not humiliation. That's information. Sophie's eyes went a little bright at that, and she looked down at our hands instead of at me, like she needed a second to compose herself before continuing. Information, she repeated softly. I like that better than humiliation. Over the following weeks, we kept finding reasons to see each other. Coffee after her shifts, a walk through a park near her apartment where she pointed out the tree Dylan had once insisted looked exactly like a dragon if you squinted right. A Sunday afternoon where I brought my camera and photographed her doing absolutely nothing remarkable, just reading on her couch in old sweatpants, because I'd realized somewhere along the way that I wanted photographs of the real version of her, not just the dressed-up one from a party that never happened the way it should have. It was during one of those quiet Sunday afternoons that Priya finally called. Sophie's phone rang while we were sitting on her couch, my camera resting on the coffee table between us, and she glanced at the screen, hesitated, then answered on speaker without me having to ask. Hey, Priya said, voice bright in that particular way people get bright when they're overcompensating for something. Long time no talk. I feel like we haven't caught up properly since your birthday. Sophie's expression didn't change much, but something in her posture straightened. That's one word for it, she said. There was a pause on the line. Look, I know that whole night was a mess, Priya said. Everyone felt terrible about it. Things just got chaotic that week, and I meant to check in sooner, but life, you know? I do know, Sophie said evenly. I know that 40 people had scheduling conflicts at the exact same time, and I know that a smaller, low-key version of my own birthday happened 2 days later without me in it. Another pause, longer this time. That wasn't Sophie, Priya said carefully. It just kind of happened. Marcus wanted to do something casual, and I didn't think you'd even want to come after everything felt so awkward. You didn't think I'd want to come to my own birthday celebration, Sophie repeated slowly, like she was testing whether the sentence made any more sense out loud. I looked at Sophie, and she looked back at me, and something passed between us in that glance, something like permission. She didn't need me to say anything. She just needed to know she wasn't imagining how wrong that sentence sounded. I think, Sophie said into the phone, that for a long time I confused being convenient with being important to people. And I think I finally understand the difference. Sophie, that's not fair, Priya started. No, Sophie said, voice steady in a way I hadn't heard from her before. Not fair was inviting 40 people to celebrate me and then quietly rescheduling without me 2 days later. I'm not angry anymore, Priya. I'm just done pretending the math works when it clearly doesn't. There was a long silence on the line. Then, quieter, Priya said, I really am sorry. I know that doesn't fix it. It doesn't, Sophie said, not unkindly, just honestly. But thank you for saying it. She hung up after that, set the phone down on the couch cushion, and let out a long breath, like she'd been holding something in her chest for 8 years and had only just found a place to set it down. How do you feel? I asked. Lighter, she said, surprising herself with the answer. I thought that would hurt more than it did. Sometimes closing a door quietly is louder than slamming it, I said. That's annoyingly wise for someone who once wore novelty sunglasses professionally, she said, and I laughed, and something in the room felt like it had shifted permanently, the way a house settles differently after you've finally fixed the thing that had been creaking for years. Not everyone in Sophie's old orbit disappeared quietly, though. About 3 weeks after the phone call with Priya, Marcus showed up. I hadn't met him yet. Not properly. Only knew the name from the group chat that never sent a real message. Just 3 dots appearing and vanishing twice. Sophie had mentioned him a few times since. Always carefully. The way you mention someone you used to trust more than you currently do. They dated briefly 2 years before her birthday. On and off. Nothing that ever became official. But enough history that his silence that night had apparently stung sharper than most of the other 40 no-shows combined. He texted her on a Wednesday evening while we were making dinner in my kitchen, and I watched her go quiet reading it. The same particular quiet from the night of the party, the one that meant something had landed somewhere deep. What does he want? I asked. Sophie set the phone face down on the counter, the same instinct she always had with anything that threatened to ruin a good evening. He wants to get coffee, she said. Catch up. Says he feels bad about missing my birthday and wants to make it right. Do you want to see him? She considered the question honestly instead of answering on reflex, which I'd come to appreciate about her more with every week that passed. Part of me does, she admitted. Not because I want him back in any romantic sense. Because some old, tired part of me still wants an explanation. I think I want to hear him say it wasn't about me, even though some part of me already suspects it was. I didn't tell her not to go. That wasn't my call to make, and I respected her too much to try. Then let's go together, I said instead. Not because I don't trust you. Because you shouldn't have to walk into that conversation alone the way you walked into that empty room alone. She agreed, and 2 days later we met Marcus at a coffee shop near her hospital, the kind with too many succulents on the windowsill and a barista who clearly resented the oat milk economy. Marcus arrived looking exactly like a man who'd rehearsed an apology in his car before walking in. Tall, a little too polished, the kind of easy charm that probably worked fine on people who hadn't just spent a month learning the difference between convenient and important. He saw me sitting beside Sophie, and his expression flickered, recalculating something. Didn't realize this was a group outing, he said, trying for lighthearted and landing somewhere closer to uneasy. Ryan's my boyfriend, Sophie said simply, no defensiveness in it, just fact. He's here because I wanted him here. Marcus recovered quickly, sliding into practiced apology mode. Look, he said, about your birthday. I know that was bad timing on my part. I got caught up with work stuff and just kind of lost track of the date. Sophie studied him for a long moment. The group chat had a date and location 3 weeks in advance. Marcus, what exactly did you lose track of? He shifted in his seat. Honestly, he said, I think I just didn't want to be in a room where people expected me to figure out what we were. It felt easier to stay quiet than deal with that in front of everyone. So my birthday became a convenient place to avoid a conversation you didn't want to have, Sophie said. That's not an apology. That's a confession dressed up as one. I watched something settle in her as she said it. The same steadiness I'd first heard on the phone call with Priya, a woman who'd finally stopped translating other people's convenience into her own responsibility. Marcus didn't have a good answer for that, and after a few more minutes of hollow small talk, he left with considerably less composure than he'd walked in with. Outside, Sophie exhaled long and slow. That felt better than I expected, she said. Closure usually does, I said, once you stop needing the other person to feel as bad as you did. She laughed at that, tired but genuine, and slipped her hand into mine as we walked back toward my car. I think I'm done collecting apologies from people who only give them once they've been caught, she said. I'd rather just collect people who never make me wait for one in the first place. I think you already have, I told her, and she smiled in a way that told me the sentence had landed exactly where I meant it to. It was another month before either of us said the actual words, though I think we both knew long before then. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday, nothing special about the date, no anniversary, no built-in reason for the moment to matter beyond the fact that it was simply true. We were in my apartment this time, and I was showing her the final edited gallery from her birthday, the real one, the two of us in ridiculous props, the cake. The moment her laugh went from performed to real, the quiet portrait I'd taken of her at the end of the night when she thought I wasn't looking, hand resting on the table, eyes tired but calm in a way that told the whole story better than any posed photo could have. "You made an empty room look like the best party I've ever been to," she said quietly, scrolling through the images. "That's because it stopped being about the party pretty early on," I said. "It became about you. The room was just where that happened to take place." She looked up at me then, and I could see her deciding something, the same way she'd decided to sit down at that abandoned table months earlier instead of walking out the door. "I need to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to not think I'm only saying it because you're the person who happened to be there that night." "I'm listening," I said. "I love you," she said, simply. No dramatic build-up, no performance, just the plain shape of the sentence sitting in the space between us. "And I don't think it's about who showed up when everyone else didn't. I think it's about who I became when I stopped mistaking loneliness for normal and started noticing what it actually felt like to be chosen." Something in my chest went warm and unsteady all at once, the good kind of unsteady, the kind you don't get to feel very often after a divorce teaches you to guard against it. "I love you too," I said. "And for what it's worth, I don't think I showed up to your empty party by accident. I think some part of me had been waiting a long time to be in a room with someone who actually meant something, instead of just documenting other people's meaning from a professional distance." She smiled, the real one, the one I'd first caught on camera in a room full of empty chairs, and leaned forward to kiss me, slow and certain, the kind of kiss that doesn't need an audience to feel like it matters. 6 months later, Sophie invited me to meet Dylan, the kid from the oncology ward with the cartoon frog wristbands, now 2 years into remission and insufferably proud of it. He looked at me with the particular suspicion 10-year-olds reserve for adults dating people they've claimed as their own, and asked if I could draw frogs as well as Sophie could. I told him honestly that I could not, but that I owned a camera and could make him look extremely cool in exchange for artistic collaboration. He accepted the trade. Sophie watched the whole negotiation with an expression I hadn't seen on her before, something like relief, like she was finally allowing herself to believe good things could stick around without an expiration date attached. A year after the party that never happened the way it was supposed to, Sophie and I moved in together, into a small apartment with just enough space for her plants and my camera equipment to coexist without declaring war on each other. We hosted a housewarming, small and deliberate this time, just people who had actually shown up for both of us over the past year. Priya wasn't invited, not out of cruelty, just honesty. Some doors close quietly and stay that way, and that's allowed to be okay. 2 years after the party, I proposed to Sophie in that same banquet room, the one with the exposed brick and the built-in string lights, empty again except for the two of us, because I wanted her to know that the room itself had never been the problem. I'd arranged with the venue to let us in quietly on an ordinary evening. No decorations this time, no cake, no swan slowly losing its shape in the corner. Just us, standing where we'd first sat across an abandoned table from each other, cutting cake that was never meant to go to waste. "This room owes you an apology," I told her, kneeling down with a small box I'd been carrying around nervously for 2 weeks. "It let you down once. I'd like to be the one who finally makes it right." She cried, then laughed, then said yes before I even finished the question properly, which I've since learned is very on brand for a woman who once decided, in the space of a single humiliating evening, that she was done waiting around for people who couldn't be bothered to show up. When people ask us now how we met, Sophie tells them, "Half the guest list canceled on my 30th birthday, and the photographer stayed anyway." I usually add, "best decision I ever made professionally and personally," in that order, which always makes her roll her eyes and swap my arm, though she's smiling every time she does it. Because that's the truth of it. 40 people had the chance to show up for her that night, and chose comfort over her instead. But one stranger with a camera and no other plans decided that cake was worth staying for, and somewhere between the second slice and the ridiculous plastic tiara, staying for cake turned into staying for good. What would you have done if you showed up to someone's party and found out you were the only guest who came? And have you ever found out, the hard way, Exactly who actually shows up for you when it matters. Tell me your story in the comments. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.